I had just settled into my favorite chair on the back deck, coffee in hand, watching the golden morning sun stretch across the fairways of my private golf course. For 15 years, I'd poured my time, soul, and savings into transforming this land, once a rough patch of earth behind my family home, into a sanctuary of lush greens and perfectly sculpted bunkers. Every slope, every blade of grass, every sprinkler head was a testament to patience, precision, and legacy. My father taught me to swing a club right here when I was just a boy. This wasn't just a golf course. It was home, and then I heard it. Engines, lots of them. At first I assumed maybe my grounds crew had shown up early, but then came the honking, the slamming of doors, the low thrum of high-end engines shutting off one after another. I frowned, stood up, and grabbed my binoculars. What I saw made the blood drain from my face. A line of luxury vehicles, SUVs, sports cars, sedans, was crawling onto my greens like ants invading a picnic. 3 people in orange vests were wading them in with cheerful indifference, guiding them right across my fairways, their tires sinking into my carefully maintained turf. I bolted down the stairs in my robe, heart racing, and intercepted a young man as he directed a Mercedes toward my 7th hole. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. "Annual community barbecue, sir," he said, handing me a flyer without a care in the world. "Parking's $10. Proceeds go to community improvements." I looked at the flyer. There it was in bold black letters, convenient parking at the adjacent golf course. Adjacent, as if I were some empty lot. I stared in disbelief as rows of cars began forming across my greens. My greens. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an ambush. And I knew exactly who was behind it. Sandra Mitchell, HOA president, queen of control. She'd finally crossed the line. I tried calling her straight to voicemail. I sent 3 texts, no reply. Meanwhile, another car rumbled onto my 8th hole, crushing a sprinkler head and sending a geyser of water into the air. By 9 a.m., nearly 100 cars had taken over my course. Some folks were unloading coolers, dragging them through the sand traps like beachgoers. One guy even set up folding chairs in my bunker. I stood in the middle of it all, clutching the crumpled flyer, fury rising like the steam off my destroyed turf. They thought this was just a patch of grass. They had no idea what they had stepped on. They had no idea who they were messing with. As I stood there watching my greens being trampled under luxury tires and folding chairs, my mind drifted not away from the chaos, but deeper into it, into the roots of this place. This wasn't just a golf course. It was my father's dream. Mine too. He used to bring me out here when it was just a ragged stretch of wild field behind our old house. I was 8 years old, swinging a plastic club while he corrected my stance with the kind of patience only a father could give. We'd talk about how one day, when we had the time and the means, we'd turn this land into a real course. Something of our own. A sanctuary. That dream became more than just weekend talk after he got sick. Cancer didn't take him fast, but it took him steady. The kind of slow fading that makes you desperate to hold on to anything permanent. His final wish, written in a note I still keep in my desk, was simple. Make it real. Build it. And so I did. After the funeral, after the grief stopped feeling like a punch and started feeling like weight, I made a promise. I cashed out what I could. I took night classes in landscape architecture. I studied soil composition, turf management, irrigation systems. Every weekend for the next decade I was out here, shaping, planting, adjusting, reworking. I designed every green myself, walked every contour until it felt right. It wasn't about prestige. It wasn't for money. This was about memory, about legacy, about finishing something my dad and I started together. And when it was done, really done, I didn't stop. I kept maintaining it like it was sacred ground, because to me it was. The bent grass I used? Imported. 4 times the cost of regular sod. The irrigation system? Designed by 3 engineers. Each sprinkler head was synced to a moisture sensor, monitoring every ounce of hydration like it was running a high-tech medical lab. One of those heads, now broken by some idiot in a Range Rover, cost more than the first car I ever owned. After a heart attack nearly killed me at 40, my doctor said I needed peace. This course became my therapy, my church. I'd walk it every morning at sunrise, feeling the grass beneath my feet like a pulse. I watched my own kids take their first swings here, the same way my dad once watched me. My daughter's first birdie, my son's first drive, that outdistanced mine. I have those moments burned into my memory like film stills, and it wasn't just for us. I gave back, hosted charity tournaments, let the high school golf team practice here when their course flooded last spring, taught free lessons to neighborhood kids during summer. I didn't build this place to keep it locked away, but I did build it to be respected. That's why what happened today wasn't just frustrating, it was personal. It was betrayal. The community I thought I'd been serving just rolled over my father's legacy like it was a strip mall parking lot. And worst of all, they were led here by someone who knew exactly what this place meant to me. Sandra had heard the stories. She'd seen the photos in the community newsletter. She knew, and still she gave the order to invade. I clenched my fists, feeling the rage boiling just beneath my skin. They didn't just park on my course. They parked on everything I'd ever worked for. And I wasn't going to let that go. The truth is, the war didn't start that Saturday. It started 3 years ago, the day Sandra Mitchell got herself elected as HOA president and decided the neighborhood was her personal kingdom. At first, it was subtle, a comment here, a passive-aggressive note there. Then came the letters, official-looking envelopes delivered to my mailbox, citing the height of my ornamental grasses, claiming they violated some obscure aesthetic guideline. Next, it was the landscaping crew, my guys who never started before 8 a.m. being harassed for making too much noise. Equipment deliveries suddenly became neighborhood disturbances. I tried to play nice, attending HOA meetings, bringing good wine to block parties, offering free golf lessons to board members' kids, but nothing softened her because to Sandra, my golf course wasn't a community treasure, it was a threat. It was green space she couldn't control. The tipping point came last summer. I heard she was quietly circulating a petition to rezone my property, arguing it was a waste to use prime residential land for a private course. The petition failed, but I wasn't naive. Neighbors told me she'd been meeting with developers. Survey stakes started popping up on the edge of my property like weeds. I installed security cameras. I documented everything, every conversation, every email, every passive-aggressive slight. I even caught a guy taking photos of my irrigation layout, pretending to jog, and still I kept my cool. Because I believed in handling things the right way. I wanted to believe this was just a petty power trip, that it would pass, but then 2 weeks before the barbecue, I overheard something at a neighborhood gathering that changed everything. Sandra, laughing over a glass of wine, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That golf course is a waste of space. We could fit 40 families there, all paying HOA dues." She didn't know I was standing right behind her. I almost confronted her right then and there, but I didn't. I told myself I'd wait for proof. I'd handle it legally, strategically. What I didn't realize was that she wasn't waiting. She was already laying the trap. All those little battles were just the lead up to her big move. She wanted my land, and she was willing to play dirty to get it. And when the day of the barbecue came, when she sent 200 cars rolling across the greens I'd spent 15 years building with my own hands, she finally showed her hand. That wasn't just a fundraiser. It was an invasion, a calculated move to break me, humiliate me, and show the neighborhood that she was in charge. But Sandra underestimated something important. I wasn't just a man with a golf course. I was a man with a memory, a man with a plan, and a man with nothing left to lose. Saturday started like every other Saturday for the past 15 years. I was on my deck before sunrise, coffee in one hand, binoculars in the other, watching the dew shimmer on my 7th green as the sky turned orange and gold. The air was still, peaceful, my sanctuary. And then, like a crack through glass, the sound of multiple engines shattered it. At first I thought it might be my grounds crew showing up early. Then came the honking, doors slamming, laughter, dozens of voices, too many. I scanned the fairway with my binoculars and froze. 3 volunteers in orange vests were standing at the entrance to my property, cheerfully waving in car after car. Luxury SUVs, sedans, convertibles. Right onto my turf, they weren't even hesitating. The tires dug into the soft ground, compressing the bentgrass I'd imported, leaving deep ruts and muddy tracks. I dropped my coffee and sprinted inside to throw on clothes. By the time I got down to the 7th hole, a young man in an orange vest was guiding a brand-new Mercedes straight onto the fairway. I stepped in front of the car, arms outstretched, and shouted, "What the hell is going on here?" The kid blinked at me like I was crazy. "Annual community barbecue, sir," he said, handing me a flyer. "Parking is $10. Proceeds benefit community improvements." I stared at the flyer. My blood boiled. "Convenient parking at the neighboring golf course," it said. The audacity. This wasn't just some miscommunication. This was a calculated move. My phone was already in my hand as I turned away, dialing Sandra's number. Straight to voicemail, I left a message. Then another. Then one more, sharper, more furious. No reply. Cars kept rolling in. The line was backed up down the street. I ran along the property line taking photos. The damage was immediate. Tire marks sliced across my manicured fairways. One of the custom irrigation heads, each one worth over $11,000, had already been crushed. Water was bubbling up through the soil like a busted pipe, turning the area into a mud pit. I spotted a man spinning the wheels of his Range Rover after getting stuck in a sand trap. Instead of stopping, he floored it, spraying sand across the green. 2 kids were dragging a cooler across my fringe, laughing as the wheels tore up the edge. By 9 a.m., nearly 100 cars had turned my course into a disaster zone. And worse, people were treating it like a tailgate party. Trunks open, lawn chairs set up in bunkers, coolers balanced on sprinkler heads, the sprinklers. My stomach sank. I sprinted to the 5th hole, and sure enough, one of the main lines had burst. Water was pouring out in a steady stream. I was looking at thousands of dollars in damage per hour, and that didn't even count the structural damage underground. I tried reasoning with a few of the attendees. Some looked apologetic, confused. Most pointed to the signs and the vests. But the HOA said it was okay. One woman even asked me if I was trying to scam people. "You mean the HOA is lying? We paid for parking. Are you saying this is fake?" I didn't answer. I was too busy filming the destruction, snapping pictures, documenting every inch of my ruined turf. By now the party was in full swing. Music blasted from speakers near the clubhouse. I walked toward the crowd, trying to control the fury bubbling inside me. And there she was, Sandra, wearing a pristine white blouse like she was hosting a wedding, not directing the destruction of private property. She stood dead center on my prized green, directing cars like some kind of parking overlord. When our eyes met, she smiled, a fake smug smile with just a flicker of real satisfaction underneath. "John, I was just about to call you," she said, raising her voice so the nearby guests could hear. "We need to talk." I stopped a few feet away, holding the flyer in one hand. "This is my golf course, Sandra, not your parking lot." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, it's just grass. It'll grow back. The community needed parking for the fundraiser." I pointed at the bubbling sprinkler head behind her. "That sprinkler you just crushed costs more than your car." "You're trespassing." She leaned in closer and lowered her voice. "The community's needs outweigh your little hobby, John. There's a public golf course 10 minutes away. Go play there." I held the flyer up in front of her. "You're charging people to park here. You're making money off my property without permission. That's not a community event. That's fraud." Her smile slipped for just a moment before snapping back into place. "We're a nonprofit holding a fundraiser. We have certain authority within the HOA. Your jurisdiction ends at my property line, and you know it." Her expression darkened. "What are you going to do? Call the cops on your neighbors? Tow 200 cars? Think about how that's going to look." I stared at her, chest heaving. Around us, people were watching, pulling out phones, whispering. "You have no idea what kind of mistake you've made," I said, low and steady. "The only mistake," she shot back, "was expecting you to be a team player." Then she turned on her heel and walked back into the crowd, issuing orders like nothing had happened. Back at the house, I made 2 calls. First, the police. After 15 minutes on hold, I was told it was a civil matter, no signage, no physical confrontation, no criminal trespass. Then I called my lawyer, Michael, a fellow golfer, thankfully. He was furious. "They're on legally thin ice," he told me, "but getting an emergency injunction on a Saturday is next to impossible. Document everything, every car, every conversation, every dollar they collect." So that's what I did. I grabbed my camera and headed back out, and that's when I saw it. At the makeshift parking entrance, volunteers were taking cash, not just for parking, but for tickets, event admission. I zoomed in with my lens. The flyer said proceeds go to the Sunshine Foundation. I'd never heard of it. A quick online search later, I found the truth. The nonprofit was created 3 months ago. Registered agent, Sandra's sister. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a fundraiser. It was a scheme. A for-profit event disguised as charity, run by the very people who'd been trying to take my land for years. I wasn't just dealing with trespassers. I was staring down a hostile takeover, and it was about to get very real. I stood in my office, fists clenched, watching through the window as more cars rolled onto my property like an unstoppable tide. The 5th green looked like a war zone. The irrigation system I'd spent years perfecting was bleeding water into the soil. Music from the barbecue echoed through the trees like a victory chant, as if Sandra had already won. But she hadn't. Not yet. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to be the man who built something beautiful only to watch it get trampled and sold off by a woman with a clipboard and a fake smile. I called 4 people I trusted more than anyone, my old golf buddies. David, a retired attorney who had helped me write the original bylaws for the land use agreements when I developed the course. Mark, a professional photographer who had once worked crime scenes. Tony, my engineer friend who had helped design the drainage layout for the back 9. And Phil, a golf instructor who had taught at Pebble Beach before retiring to our neighborhood. Within minutes, they were all in. furious, motivated, and already on their way. David said exactly what I was thinking. She's using your land for a commercial event without permission. That's not a neighborly dispute. That's illegal use of private property, but we can't stop it with brute force, not today, so we needed something smarter, more targeted. I took a deep breath and said the words that lit the spark. We're going to play golf. Confused silence on the line, then laughter. Phil was the first to catch on. You mean right now? On the course? I nodded, even though no one could see me. This is a golf course. Its purpose is for golf. That's exactly what we're going to do. When they got to my place, we gathered in the kitchen like we were plotting a heist. I laid out the photos, the flyers, the screenshots of Sandra's fake charity, and the cash being collected at the gate. David pulled out his legal pad. Mark unpacked his camera gear, setting up a live stream directly to the neighborhood's Facebook group. Phil laid out training aids and portable targets. Tony grabbed his golf cart and began loading up gear. We planned our move carefully. If we tried to stop the event head-on, we'd be painted as aggressors. But if we simply used the property for its intended purpose, legally, safely, and publicly, we'd expose the absurdity of what was happening. We chose the 5th hole for our practice zone, the same hole currently buried in BMWs, Teslas, and Range Rovers. We set up targets in safe, controlled areas, far enough to show good faith, but close enough that any shank shot might send a golf ball skipping dangerously close to chrome. We put up signs, caution, golf practice area. We made it clear we were not aiming at vehicles, but if a car was parked on a golf course, well, that was on them. I put on my most official-looking golf attire, the same outfit I'd worn at the state charity tournament the year before. Phil laid out the trading cones. Mark started the live stream. David drafted a notice of formal property misuse. Tony adjusted the cameras for maximum visibility. As we stepped onto the green, golf bags in hand, barbecue attendees started to notice. Heads turned, conversations paused. Then, like a hawk spotting movement, Sandra saw us. Her face shifted from confusion to alarm in a split second. She broke away from a group of people near the grill and stormed across the fairway toward us. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped, eyes flashing. "Practicing golf," I said calmly, teeing up a ball with my father's titanium driver. "On my property, on my golf course, there are people everywhere. You can't just start swinging." "Actually," David cut in smoothly, "this is private property, a designated golf facility. These vehicles parked here are the ones creating the hazard, not us." As she fumed, I took a practice swing, calm, fluid. Years of muscle memory took over. I stepped up and launched the ball. It sailed clean, fast, and true, landing squarely on the practice target before bouncing harmlessly but deliberately between a Lexus and a Porsche. The crowd gasped. Some clapped. A few people started moving toward their cars. Sandra's eyes widened. "If you hit a car," she growled, "I'll have you arrested." I looked her straight in the eye. "I certainly hope no damage happens. Just like I hope no one slips on the water from the crushed irrigation head near hole 7. Phil stepped up and took his shot, a clean drive that skimmed low and rolled to a stop inches from the bumper of a Mercedes. Within minutes, people were scrambling. Parents grabbed kids, drivers climbed into vehicles, and reversed hastily through the mess. One man muttered, "He's not kiddin', he'll keep hittin'." Another, already sweating, shouted over the music, "I thought this place was closed today." As the 5th ball hit the grass and skipped toward the hedge line, the domino effect kicked in. Cars began peeling out in waves. Engines roared. A woman tripped over a sprinkler head trying to collect her folding chairs. It was chaos. But controlled chaos. Not once did we aim at a vehicle, but the implication was loud and clear. You park on a golf course, you take the risk. Sandra was shaking now. She tried to stop us stepping forward again, but I gently blocked her with my arm. "Please, don't interfere with my swing. That's dangerous." The cameras caught every second. My live stream climbed from 12 viewers to 200 in less than 10 minutes. Neighbors began sharing it, commenting, "That's my car, what the hell is happening? Is Sandra charging people to park on a golf course?" People who had ignored her power plays before were now wide awake, and that was just the beginning. As the crowd thinned and the cars began to disappear one by one, something shifted in the air. It was subtle at first, a murmur here, a nervous laugh there, but it spread quickly, like a spark catching dry grass. People weren't just annoyed anymore. They were curious, suspicious. They'd seen the live stream, heard the confrontation, and now they were looking around with fresh eyes. A man in a polo shirt walked up to me, clapping slowly. "I've been waiting years for someone to stand up to this HOA tyranny," he said loud enough for others to hear. "You know she fined me $500 because my trash bins were visible for 2 hours. On a non-election day, that opened the floodgates. A woman nearby chimed in. She threatened to revoke my landscaping approval because I used a different brand of mulch. Someone else added, my kid's lemonade stand got a violation for not having a permit. The crowd started to cluster, no longer guests at a barbecue, but citizens gathering for something more serious. And then the real bomb dropped. Frank Miller, a retired police officer who lived a few houses down, pushed his way forward. He spoke with a calm authority that instantly quieted the group. The HOA has no jurisdiction on private property, Sandra. You know that. This isn't just an overstep, it's abuse. Sandra, who had been hovering on the edge of the group, trying to regain control, marched forward with two of her loyal board members in tow. Harold, a retired banker who nodded at everything she said, and Diane, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. This is reckless endangerment, Sandra snapped. As HOA president, I'm officially declaring this event compromised by the actions of the property owner. You're officially what? Frank interrupted, raising an eyebrow. You directed people to park on a private golf course without permission. That's not enforcement. That's trespassing, and that's not even the worst part, I said, stepping forward and holding up a copy of the flyer. According to this, proceeds go to the Sunshine Foundation. Anyone here familiar with that organization? A few shrugged. One woman nodded vaguely. I continued. It was incorporated 3 months ago, registered under the name of Sandra's sister. The crowd stirred. What? That's not a charity I've ever heard of. I've donated to this. Where's the money really going? David, my lawyer friend, held up his phone with the incorporation documents visible. The only officer listed is her sister, and there are no public financials. That's a red flag. Sandra turned beet red. It's defamatory. I'll sue you for slander. Truth is a defense to slander, David replied coolly, and we have the receipts. Diane, the board member who had been silent until now, finally stepped away from Sandra. Her voice was shaky but clear. You told us this event was about bringing the community together. You never mentioned money. You never mentioned your sister. The tide had turned completely. One neighbor after another came forward, telling their own stories. She told me if I didn't volunteer for this barbecue, my street wouldn't get priority snow plowing. She made me pay a $200 fine for having my hose visible from the sidewalk. The crowd wasn't angry anymore. They were united, exposing, awakening. It was no longer about my golf course. It was about every unfair ticket, every shady contract, every power trip Sandra had pulled since she got elected. And just when it felt like things couldn't spiral further, Mark pointed behind me. News van, he said simply. I turned and saw a local news crew pulling into my driveway, cameras already rolling. The live stream had reached the right person, and now this wasn't just neighborhood drama, it was a public scandal. Sandra's face turned ghost white. She tried to compose herself, stepping forward with a well-rehearsed smile. This man is disrupting a community charity event, she said to the reporter, hitting golf balls at vehicles. Frank cut in immediately. That's not accurate. They were practicing golf on a golf course. The real story is that hundreds of cars were parked on private property without permission. The reporter, a sharp-looking woman named Alyssa, turned to me. Is that true? I nodded and handed her a folder with everything, photos, emails, HOA documents, incorporation records. She flipped through it and looked back at her cameraman. Roll it. As Sandra backed away, clearly scrambling for damage control, a woman approached me. Carol. I had seen her around but never spoken with her. I was on the board 2 years ago, she said quietly. I resigned when I questioned a landscaping contract that went to Sandra's brother-in-law, twice the competing bid. That was it. The final piece. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a system, a machine, fueled by control, money, and silence. Until today. Until a single golf swing cracked the dam. And now the flood was coming. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. The news segment aired Sunday evening, complete with drone footage of luxury cars parked across my greens, interviews with angry neighbors, and the smoking gun development plans for high-rise condos labeled Sunshine Estates, with my golf course as ground zero. By Monday morning, the HOA was in full crisis mode. An emergency board meeting was called, and for the first time in years, the room was packed beyond capacity. Standing room only. Sandra didn't show. She sent a letter citing health concerns. But the damage was already done. Diane, now acting as the interim president, took the floor. With shaking hands and a steady voice, she laid out the truth. Unauthorized use of private property, misrepresentation of HOA authority, financial discrepancies involving Sunshine Foundation, and contracts tied to Sandra's relatives. Then Harold, the banker, who once nodded at everything Sandra said, stood up and read a statement. He had been asked to sign papers approving a partnership with developers papers that falsely claimed I had agreed to sell. That broke whatever trust remained. The board unanimously accepted Sandra's resignation. Cheers erupted across the room. Then came the apology. Diane handed me a formal letter on behalf of the HOA, accepting full responsibility and promising to pay all damages, estimated at over $70,000. Even more unexpected, they offered a proposal to recognize my property boundaries formally, acknowledge that HOA rules no longer applied to my land, and establish an annual neighborhood golf day done properly with permission, respect, and shared purpose. But the moment that truly hit me came the following Saturday. I woke up early, ready to begin repairing my ruined greens, only to find over 30 neighbors already there, rakes in hand, wheelbarrows full of sod, cups of coffee steaming in the cold morning air. Some I barely knew. Some had parked on my course just a week ago. Now they were working beside me, laughing, sweating, helping. We formed teams, reseeded bunkers, repaired broken sprinklers, releveled fairways, and as the sun climbed higher, I looked out across the green and felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude, not just for the course, but for what it had become. A bridge, a catalyst, a place that started as a father's dream and became the center of a community waking up from silence. Sandra may have tried to bulldoze it all for profit, but what she built instead without meaning to was unity. And that was worth every swing.